I'm Liz Larson.
And I'm Bill McKenna.
And together, we created the Cogno Movement System. And we'd like to welcome you to the New Life Perspectives radio show,
where we're going to be sharing with you tools, tips, and ideas that are going to change your life.
Hello in UK Health Radio Land. I'm Liz Larson, and I'm here with my friend,
Bill McKenna.
Hey, Bill McKenna. And we're the pair that hosts the New Life Perspectives radio show here on the UK Health Radio Network. And we just happen to be the duo that created the Cogno Movement System. Today, we're so excited. We have Dr. Eben Alexander back again. And you might remember a couple of episodes ago, he was here talking about his near-death experience. It was amazing. And the way he came back to life and has led a new life since then. Well, today he brought with him his partner, Karen Newell. So I'm going to toss this right over to you guys and have Eben share how you guys got together and who is this Karen Newell?
Well, thank you, Liz and Bill. It's great to be back. Well, yes, who is this mysterious Karen Newell? Well, I'll tell you, for me, the world changed about 3 years after my coma. You know, my coma, the NDE was a week-long coma back in November 2008. It was actually November 2011 when I'd been pursuing several months of work on differential frequency brainwave entrainment for deep meditation. And I was fascinated with this technology, and there are many reasons why I thought it was a beautiful ticket to help me return to my near-death experience. And in November 2011, I was at a workshop where we were learning to teach these kinds of techniques to people. That was not far from here, just south of Charlottesville in Virginia. And that's where I met Karen Newell. And I knew when I first met her that this was, that we had some serious work to do in this world. I think it took a few weeks for me to convince her of that. But the reality is meeting, a few months, but that meeting to me was a watershed moment because my search, for spiritual truth, for uniting the science and spirituality, very deep search, and yet I seemed to be at a standstill in some ways. And meeting Karen was a tremendous catalyst to kind of open my eyes and help me move forward. And we've spent the 11 years since that time working together. So, Karen?
So when we first met, I have to tell you this. When your listeners probably realized from the last interview how Eben can be very scientific when he's talking about things. And so I knew when I met him that he'd had a near-death experience, but I didn't really know anything else about him. But I'd met others who'd had NDEs, and I knew that they usually came back with these profound transformations. They were new people. They had learned very profound personal lessons. And so I asked Eben, I just wanted to cut right to the deepest aspect. What did you learn? What did you come back with from that near-death experience? And he says, the brain doesn't create consciousness. And I was kind of confused. And I said, well, why would anyone think that it does? And I didn't realize, honestly, that is kind of the fulcrum of materialist scientific thinking, reductive materialist scientific thinking, that consciousness, our very awareness, just somehow magically arises from the brain. But no one can tell you how that works. And I never bought into that. I always understood just from being human, from being a child, that our souls were eternal, that there was a part of us that was separate from the body, that didn't need the body to survive. It was just a knowing that I had when people would talk about soul. So Eben needed to have this amazing, huge journey to the other side to come to that firsthand realization that all of us really can. And I didn't necessarily from a child understand how it all worked. But as I went through my life, I understood that my behaviors and my actions actually played a role on how other people would treat me. And so I learned maybe I need to focus on my behavior, and that will change how other people treat me. And so the more I went through my life trying to do that, the more I realized that meditation could be so very helpful. That practice of quieting the mind, of learning how to access that intuitive self that's deep within. That's what I was interested in doing. And yet I couldn't meditate. I was one of those people who said, oh my gosh, I'm so busy. My mind is racing. I'm just not one of those people who can do this, spend, hours in a cave by myself or something. And so I still kept trying. And I found eventually that sound was an excellent way to quiet the mind. And at first it was things like tuning forks or brass bowls, crystal bowls. I love how those sound. And it was a particular type of sound that's kind of engineered the way those tuning forks and crystal bowls work, known as binaural beats. And so you can take different frequencies and combine them. That's what Eben was exploring to quiet his mind so that he could free his awareness from the shackles of the brain, as he puts it. And I was using it to sort of get my racing mind out of the way so that I could get in touch with that essence, that soul, that essence of who we truly are that lies deep within. We all can learn from getting access to that. But back to Eben, when I didn't understand that he was mostly expressing a scientific lesson from his near-death experience, but he also learned a lot about love and connection. And of course, we talked about that too. And I said, well, Eben, do you love yourself? What about the love that you felt over there? And he's like, I don't really think I do. And that got us all into the fact he was adopted and, wasn't really worthy of love, and how he carried that through his whole life. So this is kind of the two topics we came together on: the science of consciousness and the reality of love as the foundation that connects us all. And so they might seem incompatible, those two topics, but we bring them together, and very important for humanity to understand this. And so I, for one, am so grateful Eben came back to this world, and maybe not so grateful he found me to do it with him. I'm one of those introverts who isn't necessarily seeking public acknowledgement for anything. I never tweet. I don't do any of that. And so anyway, I've been a reluctant and yet very enthusiastic partner with Eben on this journey.
I remember the very first sound workshop we did in Charlottesville, which was a few months after that meeting, November 2011. And I just put Karen on the docket. I knew that, of course, she could do it. She'd be great at it.
It was over a year. Yeah.
Okay. But I told her we're going to do this. And originally she kind of resisted, but I think she decided to come along, and now she's just a complete natural. I think our audiences appreciate her more than me. So that's great, because I appreciate her a lot too. So Karen brings a lot to the table in spiritual sense and from sound healing, etc. Every bit of it.
So Karen, obviously, our last interview with Eben, by the way, everybody who's listening around the globe right now, go back to the archive and look up that interview. I've gotten more phone calls and texts about that interview. Everybody loved it. Very popular. So, but what about you, Karen? How did your journey start? We know about Eben from the last interview, but how did you get here? What happened?
Well, when it comes to the spiritual aspect of things, when I was a young child, I was sat down very early on by my grandmother, who explained to me how Christianity worked, that I needed to accept Jesus into my heart, and that then I would not go to hell and be burned for all of eternity. This was my exposure to God. And I was very confused by this. And I thought, I had just been to Disneyland. I was 7 years old. And you know that exhibit, A Small World, where you see all these children from around the world. They all look different from you, but they teach you how they're all the same. And this really stuck with me. And I asked my grandmother, and I said, well, what about all the children in the world who don't hear about this? What's going to happen to them? And she said, well, that's why we have missionaries. And I thought, so if someone doesn't hear about this and they don't do what you're saying, their soul is going to spend all of eternity in a burning hell being punished? And she said, yes. I said, I don't think so. I don't think so, Grandma. I don't think that's how it works. And I just never believed it. And so as I went through life being raised as a Christian, and I would go to church camp, I loved going to church camp. It was on the beautiful Oregon coast, the beach. And I thought that was the most beautiful place to be. And at church camp, they would, talk about God, and they would say, go out in the woods and commune with God. And I would go out there expecting, okay, God, if you're so, powerful, where are you? And I never had the cloud and the shining light that this child mind was expecting. And so I thought, I don't believe this. I'm just going to commune with the trees, with the ferns, with the wind. And I just enjoyed connecting with nature. And eventually I got a little older and told one of the church camp ministers, now this was back in the 70s, so kind of a hippie-ish kind of minister, really nice guitar playing fella. And I asked him about this. I said, I'm not sure I believe in God. And he said to me, that's okay. It's not for everyone. And I said, oh my gosh, well, can I still come to church camp? He said, of course you can. And so for me, religion was the fellowship, the connection. It wasn't about the dogma and the you must do this or you will be punished. It was about being with every, other child and nature itself, and just feeling that connection. That's where I came from. And so as I grew up in the world, I didn't have any real heavy belief systems holding me back. I had the belief that I am a soul, and that was pretty much the extent of my spiritual belief, but that's what I wanted to explore. What is this soul? How can I know more about that part of me that isn't this physical body? And that's what drove me throughout my entire life. And I got exposed to like esoteric texts, like theosophical and Eastern texts and things like that. And I learned there are countless spiritual traditions out there, and they're all saying different kind of things. And yet that some of those things are universal. Those are the things I was interested in. And certainly having a soul was one of those universal truths that I felt finally I'm getting somewhere, because all religions agree with this. So anything that all religions agree with, I'm down. I'm all for it. And the golden rule is one of those. And that golden rule has made it into the secular world as well, to treat others as you would treat yourself. This is how I walk around the world, feeling as if when I greet people out in the world, how would I want to be greeted? When I'm in a restaurant or a store, and I greet them in that fashion. And so on and so on. That's who I am, and that's where I came from. And that's why by the time I met Eben, I was like, what are you talking about, revolution? We all know this stuff. And at least some of us do. Certainly you too, I'm sure, know this. Many, many people I have encountered know this. It's really the institutions that need to catch up. The scientific institutions are catching up to all of this, thank goodness. And this idea that we can all be spiritual with or without religious dogma, I think is really important. We can all feel that connection to something greater, whether we have a name for it or not. And that's who I am. Thank you for asking.
It had an amazing backstory. And it's funny because I share so many of those things with you.
Mm-hmm.
But what's really funny is it struck me when you said that Eben thought that the consciousness came from the mind. And like you, even as a little kid, that would have never occurred to me, that consciousness was in the mind, that's where it came from. It just really hit me like, wait a minute, I don't think I ever thought that. So it's interesting for people like you, Eben, that it is scientific, that the consciousness is in the mind. So what was the one thing that shifted that for you? And was it the near-death experience or something about it?
Well, it was absolutely the near-death experience, because my brain was demonstrably very much offline. It was not working. And that's why the medical case report written about my medical records, which confirms a lot of what I said in Proof of Heaven about my medical condition, is so important. Those 3 doctors who wrote the case report were fascinated by my recovery. It completely defies any medical expectation. And that's one thing that, the lay public, the non-medically educated public, has no way of knowing that. But that's, what I reported in Proof of Heaven, and it's very much confirmed by these 3 medical experts who wrote that case report, because it's a crystal clear case of how in the world did these things happen. My brain when you take the neurologic exams, the CT and MRI scans, the lab values, every bit of that paints a horribly bleak picture of a brain that could not have had a dream or hallucination at all, much less the most profound, detailed, memorable, life-changing, and alive set of events I've ever had in my life. And for all that to happen when I had hard evidence that my brain was far too damaged to support any kind of phenomenal experience was a crystal clear case of, wow, we are much more than our brain, our physical body, and these experiences are shocking. I mean, I never, ever would have remotely predicted what I went through. And yet millions of others have gone through the same thing. And that's what near-death experiences are. And to simply dismiss them as, a vast hallucination is ridiculous, especially when you read the literature and learn where these things come from. And they often come in a setting like mine, where there's just no way the brain was able to do it. And I think that's really kind of the important lesson here. And the scientific community is absolutely waking up on this. There is no doubt about that. There's been tremendous progress in the last decade. I mean, for one thing is one neuroscientist, when we were at a meeting in Belgium back in 2018, pointed out there was a major upshift in the number of scientific papers globally on near-death experiences that occurred around 2012 when Proof of Heaven was published. And it went up by a factor of 4. If you do a PubMed search of the 10 years since Proof of Heaven came out versus 32 years before that, you'll find a 4-fold increase in NDEs. And this neuroscientist was making the point that the book provided a catalyst for that. I'm not sure if I just had good timing or what, but the bottom line is, I think the scientific community has awakened tremendously to the reality of these kinds of experiences and made tremendous progress in the last 10 years in coming up with the proper theoretical models that help us more fully understand it. Essentially, it goes where Karen and I went in the book that we wrote together, Living in a Mindful Universe, that came out in 2017, to pointing to the reality of what's called objective idealism. That's the primacy of mind, or the mental layer of information in the universe. And it really shows that we're all connected through that binding force of love that Karen emphasized a little while ago. Well, from a scientific viewpoint, it's very important because we all seem to be sharing one mind, and the binding force in that one mind is really one of love. That's why we often say, for example, that the life review, your life flashing before your eyes in NDEs, is a beautiful expression of the golden rule, because most people who describe these life reviews talk about it from the emotional perspective of others around them. So they witness the events of their life, but from the impact emotionally that those actions had on other people. And so the boundaries of self dissolve in a life review, and you realize we're kind of sharing the dream of the one mind. And that, to me, was one of the most amazing things about when I first met Karen, because I was approaching through a deep kind of spiritual experience and scientific rigorous analysis of it, coming to the primacy of mind, primordial mind, and objective idealism. And Karen had been living an idealist lifestyle her entire life. That was her understanding, was mind over matter is always the way it's always worked. And of course, we have responsibility for our choices. So that's why I considered it such a great gift to meet Karen back in November 2011 when we first met. It was a godsend for me.
So let's take our first break right there. We will have some great messages from the UK Health Radio Network, and we'll be right back. UK Health, take it away. And we're back. We're having an amazing conversation with Eben Alexander and Karen Newell about NDEs, about where consciousness lives, about love and the golden rule. And sound frequency is a big part of what you do. So let's transition just a little bit into that. So, Eben, how has the sound frequency aided you since you had the NDE and in your life past?
Okay, well, I think it's important to point out that I think it was about a year and a half, 2 years after my coma, so back around early 2010, I had read more than 150 books since my coma on physics, on consciousness, on spiritual experiences, on religion, especially quantum physics, trying to get deeply into how did this happen? Why did my experience occur? And then the other big miracle brought up by those three doctors who wrote the case report is my survival. It really, there's no good explanation for my complete recovery from this terrible illness, except as they explained it to the peer review scientific editors of Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease, it's because I had the NDE, and that was the real gift. And so at any rate, I was had read all these books, trying to figure it out, and finally came to the realization I had to explore my own consciousness. I needed a regular practice of going within. And very early on in that process of discovery, I encountered the phenomenon of binaural beats. And just briefly, a history around those, they were discovered in the mid-1800s. A Prussian physicist discovered that you put a pure tone in one ear, say 100 hertz, 100 cycles per second is one example, and then a slightly different frequency in the other ear, say 104 hertz in the other ear. And it works up to a difference of about 25 hertz. But what happens is somewhere in the brain, there's a wavering sound that's produced that's the arithmetic difference between the two. So 104 hertz, 100 hertz will give you a 4 hertz perception deep in the brain. And people didn't really understand the phenomenon very well. Then in the late 20th century, certain investigators found that out-of-body experiences and remote viewing is, psychic spy programs, that kind of thing, ability to discern information at a distance. People found that those skills were greatly enhanced through binaural beats. And that's where I dove in deep. And originally, the work I was following was at the Monroe Institute up in Virginia, just south of us. And that's where I met Karen. And so really, I found that those sounds were incredibly powerful. It's because they actually influence our consciousness down in the lower brainstem. That's one of the reasons. And we can talk about that a little more later, but the bottom line is they have a profound impact on allowing conscious awareness to separate from the illusion of the here, now, and sense of self. And that's what I was totally into. And then when I met Karen, I found that she and her business partner, or future business partner, were actually very active at generating the most profound kinds of binaural beats I'd ever encountered. So
now, was that Karen? Was that you were at the Monroe Institute with Bob Monroe? He was still living back then, right?
No, Bob Monroe was not alive by the time I started going there.
he passed in 1995.
And I didn't start going there till 2007.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Amazing work that they tell us about it. This is absolutely fascinating stuff. Listeners, the Monroe Institute and what they had come up with is amazing. Out-of-body experiences. It was kind of discovered accidentally when this guy, Bob Monroe, he was playing around with frequencies. I think he was a TV producer or technical, and then or radio, and found himself literally out of his body. So that was the genesis of all of this. But tell us about what happened to you. How'd you get involved with Monroe Institute, and tell us all about it.
Well, that was just one of many places that I attended different types of workshops. I laughingly call it a spiritual boot camp, when I spent about 3 years, right up to the time I met Eben, just taking workshop after workshop in all kinds of different modalities, healing, touch for animals. I learned self-hypnosis, just on and on. Remote viewing, I got very expert at that. But sound played this very useful key. And so the Monroe Institute, attending all of the workshops involves listening to these sounds. That's also where I met Kevin Cossey. So Kevin Cossey is a mechanical electrical engineer who lives in Manhattan. He's a born and bred New York City engineer. And he was there exploring how to use sounds to get into expanded states of consciousness. I met him and he told me that he wanted to make his own binaural beats. And I thought, what an arrogant individual saying such things, that he could just make his own. And of course, as I got to know him better, this is what engineers do, right? They take things apart and they put them back together again, hopefully in better ways. And so I learned that's what he was up to. And so he learned that I had amassed a rather large library of different sound recordings that I had been exploring for many years to get into these expanded states of awareness. He wanted to get his hands on my library of audio recordings. And so that's what really motivated a partnership. So he was in New York, I was in Baltimore at the time, and we would get on the like a Skype screen. This is before Zoom and all of this was so common, but we were both highly technical, so it was no problem. And we started first we just started copying and pasting other people's binaural beats so that they were longer or in a certain order that we wanted. And he would do all of that and then provide me with the files. And so then he took it a little further. Our needs kind of shifted. We wanted different sounds. We thought, well, gosh, if only there was a little bit more of this and not as much of that. And that's when Kevin started taking apart binaural beats. We actually learned just on our own, others have done this as well. We've learned how to build all of the focus levels, focus 10, focus 12, 15, they have a bunch of, they call them focus levels. And so that's the first thing we did is we duplicated all of the Monroe Institute focus levels. Now, of course, that was only for our own use. We would never duplicate someone else's work and then present that as our own. That is not what we were up to. In fact, what we did is we changed how the binaural beats were created. So we chose carrier frequencies. Those are the frequencies you hear, like the 100 and 104 that Eben was talking about. Now all carrier frequencies in our recordings are harmonic to each other. And they weren't built that way before. And so, for example, our ohm frequencies are built with 108 hertz, 216 hertz, and then 432 hertz. When you add those numbers together, 108 plus 108 equals 216 and so on. That's what makes them harmonic, those kind of octaves. And so that's what we did. And another thing that Kevin devised was a way to incorporate monaural beats along with the binaural beats. And he adjusts them in a certain way that it really increases the power of the recordings. And so they're really required to be listened to using headphones, but so that you get the two different frequencies going to each ear in order for them to be effective. But when we added monaural beats, it turns out sometimes you can have some effectiveness even over speakers. And so that allowed us to go into events and play these for large groups of people, and found that people would have amazingly profound effects right there during a workshop. And of course, you might lose a little bit at home. We always recommend listening with the headphones. You might lose a little bit, but when you're with a group, you gain so much with everyone kind of meditating together, and shifting their vibration at the same time kind of supports others who are in the same room. And so this is how we came to create Sacred Acoustics, by really being inspired by the Monroe Institute's Hemisync and then taking it to a whole other level. And of course, listeners who are familiar with both, some of them will say that ours sound more holographic, because I think because of those monaural beats, it sounds like you're surrounded by it instead of, just in stereo. And, it's just up to the individual listener. Some folks will always be completely satisfied with a different producer of binaural beats. But the beauty is there's many of us, and they're put together differently. They're not created the same. And so it's important for the listener to try the different types that are out there and see what works best for you. We're all going to respond a little differently because we all have different brainwave states. In fact, they've discovered that brainwave states are as unique as fingerprints. They can be used to identify a person. So that's pretty amazing. So we're all starting at a slightly different level. Some of us have more delta naturally in our systems. Delta is what puts us to sleep. So some of us will find that's very easy. Others of us don't have as much delta in our systems and maybe have trouble sleeping. So just adding delta frequencies or listening to delta frequencies before you go to sleep, for example, can help some people fall asleep a little better. So there's a lot of different ways these frequencies can interact and sort of drive your brain into different states. And we haven't even got into all the different effects and applications that these can be used for.
This is going to sound like a very strange question, but if anybody can answer it, the two of you can. There was some, what was the name of that guy from Marvel? Stan
Lee's Superhuman.
Stan Lee's Superhuman. So there's a wonderful TV show where he went around the world finding superhumans. One of the superhumans that they found actually had something they call psychokinesis. So he had the ability to move objects. Now, when you hear this, you're like, really? Come on now, But I'll tell you what. They actually showed this guy on film doing it, like he could actually move objects. And what they did, which was fascinating, was they put a cap on him and measured the brainwave states. And what happened is that they figured out when he would actually move the object, his brainwave state jumped into gamma, right? And I think, long ago, they didn't even recognize there was gamma brainwave states. But this is an extremely high brainwave state. My point of bringing this up is that healers and different kind of things that seem out of the norm to your normal everyday guy out there. Do you have your binaural beats that can push you into a gamma brainwave state?
Bill, let's wait to answer that till right after our break. We'll hear from the UK Health Radio. And if Eben and Karen would be so gracious as to answer that right after, that'd be amazing. UK Health, take it away. Okay, and we're back.
It's interesting because gamma frequencies are above 30 hertz. And as Eben said earlier, you can't really build binaural beats from frequencies that are more than 25 hertz apart from each other. And so it's challenging to drive gamma to a listener. And yet, some people, when they listen to binaural beats, will find themselves entering a gamma state. And it's interesting because we had a brainwave reading device as well. Kevin and I did when we were experimenting because we wanted to see what these binaural beats were doing to our brains. And so we put them on many other people. We found that those who shifted into gamma, like you're describing, one of them was a medium. So when she was able to make that connection to a soul who had departed the physical world, her brain shifted into gamma. We had another gentleman from Australia who had an incredibly profound near-death experience of his own when he was crushed by a tractor, right? So just the sound of that, his body was in humongous distress and he survived it. And now he's able to just be in this spiritual state pretty much at will. And so when we put him on, he would just start talking and go immediately into gamma. And so, yeah, it can be really interesting to measure, but it's not so easy to drive gamma delivery. It's much more facile to drive people to lower states of awareness below that beta state. That's 12 to 30 hertz, the state we're in when we're walking, we're talking. But alpha, some people are familiar with, that's known as a more focused state. That's 7 to 12 hertz. 4 to 7 is theta, that's a more meditative state. And then 0 to 4, of course, is delta, the sleep state. Gamma is way up from that. And so some people will go into gamma when they're like an athlete. When they reach that point, they're running and they reach that ecstatic point, their brains might be in gamma. And of course, Tibetan monks are measured to be in gamma rather frequently when they're deep meditation.
Right. Yeah, gamma is one of those targets that, initially I think we had some interest in trying to generate, but I found you don't need to generate gamma with the audio. It often emerges spontaneously with a deep spiritual state. And the reason that the binaural beats are really limited to that 0 to 25 hertz range is because they're generated in a circuit in the lower brainstem called the superior olivary nucleus, which is an ancient circuit. It actually evolved more than 300 million years ago, so before the time mammals even walked the earth. And I think that's one of the reasons why binaural beats can be so powerful at engendering transcendental states of conscious awareness, is because we're affecting a circuit that is so ancient in this whole brain, mind, consciousness kind of set of axes of system. But the thing is that that circuit loses track. It has to compare the two sides. And if that difference between the two gets more than about a 25 hertz difference, it can't really keep track enough to compare them and pair them up and have it serve as an engine of transcendental meditation. But it actually works very, very well just to be driving down in these delta, theta, and sometimes alpha states that really then can uncover this flourish of gamma if someone's in a deep spiritual journey.
Now, all that being said, we do have one recording called Light Body that does include gamma frequencies, but it also includes different levels of delta, theta, and alpha. And so when we listened to straight gamma, me personally, I didn't like it. It made me nervous. Lots of folks I've learned when they listen to straight gamma, it makes them feel a little nervous. And so when we added the other frequencies, it calmed everything down. But everyone's different. Some will listen to gamma and say, that's the best thing I ever heard. So it's just trial and error for each listener.
So where can a beginner start? Like somebody who's saying, okay, I really just need to get out of my state of stress, or I'd like to enter kind of meditating. What can people do when they're just starting?
Well, I love that question because we have a product called Whole Mind Bundle. And in February of 2020, a pilot study was published using these exact recordings. It was published in the peer-reviewed Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease by Dr. Anna Yusum. She's a psychiatrist in New York City, and she prescribed this set of recordings that are included in the Whole Mind Bundle to her patients. And she had them fill out a state trait anxiety inventory. And after 2 weeks of listening regularly, she had them fill that out again. And she found that anxiety was reduced by 26% after 2 weeks of listening. And her control group were those people in the regular therapy who were not able to incorporate recordings into their routine. They saw a reduction in anxiety of just 7% over that time. And so when this came out, when this pilot study was published, was right at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. And that is when anxiety, if we could measure anxiety levels around the world, they probably increased, 1,000-fold. And so that's what motivated me to make these recordings available to anyone who would possibly need them. And so I reduced the price significantly to just $19 for a set of 9 recordings, but I also made a free option. That free option is still there, no questions asked. You just select the free option and you'll gain access to download these recordings. And so there's a whole delta, there's a whole theta, and a whole alpha. 9 recordings, 3 different versions of each, delta, alpha, theta. So this will give the listener an opportunity to find out, how do I respond to alpha, theta, and delta tones? Do they help me sleep? Do they make me calmer? And this is a perfect place for a beginner to get a variety of recordings to just start listening to in your daily routine. It includes a little PDF guide that tells you exactly how to do it. And if anyone ever has any questions, I'm available through our contact form at sacredacoustics.com. I'm always happy to help beginners, advanced, anyone, wherever they are on their journey.
So tell us where they find that piece. What's the address?
Yeah, you can go to sacredacoustics.com and just look for a Whole Mind Bundle.
So does a person need to be lying down? Does it take an hour? What do people actually have to do to get into this? What are they looking at?
So yes, there's 20-minute recordings that can be used as part of a daily routine. That's very important. And then we include 60-minute recordings that can be used while you're performing other activities. So say you're a painter and you want to be more inspired, you can put whole theta on in the background, and this will help you to kind of connect with that creative inspiration a little better. And then if you're, studying and you want to be able to have more focus, this is when you would put whole alpha on. This will help you to gain a more focused mind. Whole delta, this is what helps people with sleep. So we would recommend listening to this right before bedtime. And some people will put it on repeat and listen all night. Now, the cumulative benefits of having this regular listening routine are very wide. So many people will certainly feel that reduction in anxiety and they'll feel less stress. Others will feel a sense of calm. They'll be able to access thoughts they haven't been able to access before because their anxieties have been so much in their way. And other people will use these recordings to get in touch with their intuition. And so if you listen over time, this is something you don't necessarily listen for to gain specifically, but it's a cumulative benefit. And so what you'll find as you're listening more and more is that you'll be more in touch with that inner voice. You'll have more ability to recognize that inner voice and trust that inner voice when it does occur. And this is a process. So sometimes people, when they first listen, they'll start to feel really emotional. And when this happens, I like to just point out that this is probably triggering emotions that are already in your system that haven't necessarily been properly processed. And so the tones can seem disconcerting if that happens to you at first, as it was for me. But over time, I learned that, oh my gosh, this is triggering an emotion that I now have an opportunity to release by expressing that emotion. And so lots and lots of things can happen. Some people will find that they are able to connect with the soul of a departed loved one. Someone who has left them will suddenly appear with a message. So lots and lots of things can happen. Everyone is unique. And so you'll have different goals. We have a page on our website called I Want To. And depending on your particular goal, which we list there, will guide you to different recordings that might assist you with that particular goal. And so keep in mind, what we're trying to do is just expand our awareness beyond just the here and now of our reactive thinking. We want to gain the ability to really manage our thoughts and emotions. And getting to know our inner world, as we say, really creates the foundation for doing so. And so even if you don't have a particular goal, like connecting with a departed loved one, we all should have the goal to sort of get more in touch with that soul, that essence that we've been talking about. And this gives you that means to do so.
And one thing I love as a near-death experiencer is using sacred acoustics tones to revisit various facets of my NDE. And in fact, what Karen and I have found in workshops is we have helped people come into further knowledge about NDEs through the NDE scale that Bruce Grayson developed, a 16-element scale that he developed in the early 1980s. And from my point of view, it's very powerful to use that with people who have never had an NDE to help them cultivate some of the very same spiritual ingredients that benefit NDEers. So in other words, you don't have to have an NDE to start gleaning the power of this kind of connection through meditation.
And I would say the most important feature is that feeling of connection to something greater. When you feel that connection to something greater, you're no longer alone in this world, and you feel that one mind is there for you. And we had children who were seeing acupuncturists. They were children who had failed at committing suicide. So they did not kill themselves. They were still here. They were in therapy. And when these acupuncturists started playing our recordings, our sacred acoustics recordings during the treatment, these children started saying things like, oh my gosh, I feel this connection to the universe. If I had felt that before, I never would have tried to kill myself. That's the value of going within. That's the value of finding a tool to quiet the mind and find that way. And if it's not sacred acoustics, it's something else that will work for you.
Is this really just about the mind, or is it really about getting the overall nervous system to relax or down-regulate in some way, get out of fight or flight, which most of us are in most of the time? Is it about that too?
Well, I would say it's much more about connecting with higher soul that can bring a lot more power and a lot more kind of direction to your meditative efforts to try and bring the world of ideals in. And it's so crucial to point out that ultimately none of this is simply dependent on physical effects within the brain and the nervous system. That in many ways we're discovering this power of mind over matter is by realizing the brain is simply a filter that allows that primordial consciousness in. But ultimately, you're going to, for a full explanation, you're appealing to mechanisms that are far beyond just the brain and nervous system themselves to explain all this. And this is top-down causality. This is where that one mind can have tremendous intentions that can help us all, and where our free will can end up, generating the world of our highest aspirations and dreams. That's the important thing to understand, is this is a soul-based kind of action and activity.
So it's less about the physical, like you said. We're really not working in the physical with the binaural beats. We're working with soul and consciousness and higher mind.
Well, do remember that the binaural beats do have a physical effect in that superior olivary nucleus. So it's always a discussion about all of it. All I'm saying is don't expect to find all the answers simply within the brain and its workings. You have to appeal beyond that level to come to any kind of explanation and understanding.
So what would you guys like to know, like to say to somebody who's hearing this for the first time, and they just heard, oh my gosh, the consciousness is not in the brain, and maybe there's a way into understanding all of that through sound? What would you tell that person, like just tipping their toe in the water?
Say that this is a golden opportunity for tremendous growth and transformation, to discover self in ways that you've never really been able to do it before. Discover kind of a higher self that's more connected with the rest of the world, with that God force at the core of the universe, and to find that through the binding force of love, we all can bring tremendous positive change to this world with more harmony, prosperity, peace for all involved, by acknowledging this golden rule, written into the fabric of the universe. Through all of this discussion is really indicating to all of us the power we have to bring that love into our own lives. And by doing that, we end up changing the world for the better.
Beautiful. Well, you guys, we have reached the end of our time together. It happened so fast. Thank you so much, Karen, for joining us this time, and Eben for returning. We hope to have you guys back again. I think we could talk for years about these subjects. So would you just remind everybody where to find you and where they can get a sample of what you're doing?
You can go to sacredacoustics.com and look for the free download. Put in your email. We'll send you a free Sacred Acoustics Om recording, and also look for that Whole Mind bundle. And we also have a 33-day journey on ebenalexander.com that is a companion workbook to our book, Living in a Mindful Universe. And it also includes some sample audio files, although they don't start showing up until about day 7. It's a 33-day journey, so we dole them out to you. But every day includes a concept from the book and a personal practice for that day.
Yeah, that 33-day journey on my website is absolutely free. And I love it that we have, I don't know, at last count, 12,000 people from around the world who had taken that course, left comments. They help each other, tremendous community growing up in that 33-day journey. So highly advise people to get on board with that. It'll help you come into full knowledge of all that we're talking about.
Wonderful. And everybody, it's EBEN, and the standard spelling for Alexander, Eben Alexander, ebenalexander.com, and /33 days.
Right.
Any last, go ahead.
One last recommendation is, during the pandemic, Karen had the brilliant idea of having interviews with many of the people we would have met at conferences, world leaders in consciousness, other experiencers. And since we couldn't do that, we did interviews every 2 weeks. Those are available at inner, INNER, sanctumcenter.com. And there are other options available at that innersanctumcenter.com, but that's one that I highly advise to people, absolutely free. Those interviews are very valuable at helping bring people up to speed with this kind of understanding.
Super generous. Thanks so much, you guys, for giving that to our audience. Any last thoughts, Bill, before we go?
Okay, gotta have you back. We've got more to talk about. Audience, all of this came about because of Eben's near-death experience and the frequencies and sounds that he heard as he went through the process. So this is a no kidding type deal here, real stuff. Go out and get that 30 to 3-day program and explore this. There's a lot here.
All right. Thanks again, you guys. Everybody in UK Health Radio Land, we will see you again next week with another fascinating conversation. Please be safe and be well. See you then.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here with us on the New Life Perspective radio show. For more information or to find out more about the work that Bill and I do, please visit us at cognomovement.com or email us at info@cognomovement.com. See you again soon.